Welcome to Dr Joe Unplugged. The topics discussed in this podcast will reflect my opinions and are not in any way to be regarded as medical advice. Sometimes numbers are quite startling, even if they're showing you what arguably you might already know. So some research in the article published on Medscape today, we'll put the link in the description below as usual. Sugary drinks fuel millions of diabetes and cardiovascular disease cases. Now, we know that. We know that consumption of excess sugar is the number one contributor to type 2 diabetes. And again, important to always differentiate type 2 from type 1. Type 1 being a typically genetic condition where the body does not produce enough insulin. It's not typically related, in fact, it's not related at all to consumption of sugar, although obviously if you have it, you want to minimize your sugar intake. But type 2 diabetes is the one that we've seen the explosion of in recent decades, and mainly since the introduction of the totally discredited but still clung to by big public health low-fat dietary guidelines. Consumption of sugary drinks is linked to 9.8% of new cases of type 2 diabetes annually, contributing to approximately 2.2 million cases worldwide. And they're linked to 1.2 million new cardiovascular disease cases each year, or 3.1% of the total. And this is a study in Nature Medicine, and the researchers analysed data from the Global Dietary Database. It covers 184 countries. This was between 1990 and 2020. So it's a lot of countries over a very long period of time. I mean, 30 years is a long time to analyse data. One surprise, one might expect that perhaps the USA, Australia, Canada, and maybe UK would be at the top of the list. This time they're not. Latin America and the Caribbean were the most affected, with 24% of new global cases of type 2 diabetes and over 11% of cases of cardiovascular disease linked to sugar-added beverages. Colombia and Mexico were the leaders. Sub-Saharan Africa followed with 21.5% of new cases of type 2 diabetes and 10% of cases of cardiovascular disease linked to them. Now, again, linkage is not cause and effect, so they've looked obviously at consumption of these beverages, and necessarily self-reported has its limitation, although if anything, people tend to under rather than over report what they consume. In terms of what was included, I'm going to read the list here. Commercial or homemade sugary drinks, soft drinks, energy drinks, industrialized fruit juices, punches, lemonades, and aguas frescas, which I don't know if I got the pronunciation right or not. This is a Latin American beverage made from fruit, cereals, flowers, or seeds blended with water or sugar. However, 100% natural fruit and vegetable juices and calorie-free beverages with artificial sweeteners were excluded. Well, certainly the latter is fair enough. If it doesn't have sugar, it doesn't have sugar, and you can't really analyse the impact of sugar on anything if there's no sugar in it. Now, separate point, and I think we've spoken about this previously, there are some question marks around artificial sweeteners and whether or not they may also, in a more indirect way, contribute to the development of type 2 diabetes. The jury's a bit out on that. My view, and I've said it before, is really the only reason we have artificial sweeteners is because they provide sweetness without calories, but really you're just drinking, coloured by number water with chemicals in them. So, really much better to avoid them and drink water rather than artificially sweetened or indeed sugar sweetened beverages. Now, interestingly, 100% natural fruit juice was excluded. You could sort of say, well, look, fair enough, it's natural sugar. It is. It's still sugar. It's been estimated that to produce a glass of apple juice requires you to use about 4 to 4.5 apples. It's pretty unlikely that you're going to sit down and eat 4 or 4.5 apples in one sitting. And if you did, you certainly wouldn't be hungry for a while. You'd be quite full. But you can drink a glass of apple juice and it's necessarily not going to hit the sides. If you've eaten those apples, apart from the sugars, you've also got fibre and a whole load of other components, and it's going to get absorbed much more slowly because the body has to break down the apple. It doesn't have to break down to the same extent the apple juice. But look, to be fair, if they want to exclude it, it's okay. If anything, it would probably make the numbers even worse, I suppose. Really, again, obvious, we know this. Question still arises, why is it the case that we continue to do it? And I suppose there's a whole host of different answers to that. It's a little bit surprising sometimes that, maybe it's not surprising, that what is staring us in the face can be the very thing that we ignore. And all of these products do have labels. Now, yes, if you want to read how much sugar is in a can of energy drink or soft drink, you might need a magnifying lens to look at it. They are typically in fairly small font. A can of soft drinks at a 330 mils generally has in the order of between 10 and 11 teaspoons of sugar. Now, if people drink tea or coffee, typically they're not going to put 10 or 11 teaspoons of sugar into it. But you could have a can of soft drink, which is probably comparable volume, and you've got that amount of sugar. Cans of energy drink of 250 to 275 mils have the equivalent of about 7 to 8 teaspoons of sugar. So in some respects, an equivalent amount per mil. And my suspicion is that with energy drinks, even though they are sweet, people don't necessarily always look at the label to see how much sugar is in that. So what can we do about this? Different, at times, proposals have been put up on to add a sugar tax or a soda tax or a soft drink tax. Increasing the can cost, if you like, of a can of soft drink or energy drink by 5 cents, it's going to give more money to the government. They're going to get quite a lot, so they'll love it. Not going to really impact anybody's consumption of these products. It's not. If you increased it by $5 maybe, but that's obviously never going to happen and neither should it. So the idea of a tax, and there's basically two hymns that Big Public Health sings, and that's tax and ban. If you can't ban it, tax it. And they obviously like that because typically they see that some money will come to them so they can do, more things with it to feather their own nests. I didn't really say that. But anyway. But there's no particular law that says we have to consume these beverages. We don't. If we do, it's on us. So we can take some responsibility for what we choose to put in our mouth, and we can be responsible for what we put into the mouths of our children and those that we're responsible for. The human body is 70% water, 70% water. And that water needs to be turning over. It makes a lot of sense to be drinking water. And yes, you can get it from the tap if you've got filtered water, good. I think there's a strong case to be made for having a home filtration system or, one on your kitchen tap, but you don't have to, and you certainly don't need to buy bottled water. Again, you can if you want to. It's not wrong, obviously, but it's not necessary. But if we're drinking water of any description instead of, cans of soft drink, fruit juice, choc milk, energy drink, the list goes on. Two things. Number one, better for our body because it's water. Number two, it's going to be less expensive. And in fact, it's three, not two things. And number three, we're not getting all the excess calories. So aside from the contribution to type 2 diabetes, all the additional calories are going to typically start sitting around our middles. And we also know, and they haven't discussed this so much in this study, that there are links, in fact, very, very clear links between the development of type 2 diabetes and obesity. And in fact, the obesity often comes first. And the cause is the same. It's because of excess consumption of sugars. So the solution is actually fairly simple. Cut down consumption of sugars, total sugars through the course of the day. Now, if you've got a sweet tooth, and I have one too, and you want a sweet treat, then you can do that, maybe a few times a week. But again, at least you know there is sugar in it. It's not hidden. If you have a scoop of ice cream, you know it's a scoop of ice cream. And if you have a biscuit, you know it's a biscuit. And it's very clear that it's sugary. It's a lot of the hidden sugars, particularly in the breakfast cereals and a whole lot of snack foods that we don't know. And again, we need to read the labels, or better still, eat less foods with labels. But we need to keep our hydration up. That's always important for the human body, and we do that by consuming liquids, and the best liquid to drink is water. So the solution to this is actually quite simple. There's absolutely nothing that stops any of us from drinking water instead of a whole host of beverages with a lot of sugar in it. And it's going to be collectively better for all of us when we do that. Thanks for listening to Dr. Joe Unplugged. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share, and consider subscribing. Tell your friends. If there are topics you'd like to see covered, be in touch through the chat or email info@drjoe.net.au. We'll be uploading new content each Monday, and soon we'll be putting these videos out on X. You can follow me there at Dr. Joe's DIY Health.